Okay, at last, the long-awaited video on fringed lettering. Well, my take on it, at least. So I started off with fringes and thought, how can I turn that into lettering? So fringes are basically long satin stitches where you trim either the bobbin thread, you cut through that, and as in this flower, you pull up the loops of the top thread, and that forms a fluffy little fringe, or with a loopy fringe. Or you can cut the upper thread, as I've done here at the end of this scarf and on this tassel, and that way you have a cut edge fringe. So they're the two looks you can get. Now, if you haven't done any fringing or tassels, this image actually came from a Zoom meeting I held last year or the year before. And I know I did it in version 9, so it must have been last year. And that's available. A recording of that is available if you haven't already got that lesson, and it's available from my PayHip store. So I will put a link to that below if you want to go into more detail about fringes and tassels. And I actually show you how to digitize this tassel, which makes a lovely set of earrings, by the way, and I show you how to make this loopy fringe here. And the theory you learn from those two, you should be able to apply it to other fringes, such as on the end of this scarf. All right, so, but lettering, this sort of fringing doesn't work, and I'll show you why. I'll just get rid of that image now. Delete. Okay, so when you create a fringe, if you do it on a curve such as the flower, for instance, so let's quickly make, I actually did it with a block digitizing, so I'll just do a rough one here. I'm going to hold my control key down so I get a vertical line there, and I'm going to use right click so I get a curve. With a hole in the centre is what I'm looking for, and I've probably made this far too small in the centre, but we'll get the general idea. So they're all right clicks, and the reason I did with the block digitizing tool is explained in that Zoom lesson, but it helps you get your start and end points and avoid travel runs through your digitizing. That wasn't the best circle, but we'll enter, and we can see we've got our stitches radiating out. Of course, I didn't change it to satin, so I will do. So I'll select it, change it to satin fill, and I'm going to reduce the size because it's huge, and zoom in. Now you can even see, without going out of true view, that some of the stitches are longer than others. When you get into it, the tight circle in the curve here, the software automatically starts to shorten stitches so that it can get around the curve. The problem with that is if you want to anchor down those stitches, you have to actually bring your anchoring stitch to hold these down right out here past those needle penetrations of the shorter stitches. Otherwise, if you anchor just through here, you miss all those stitches, and when you cut your bobbin thread, they'll all pull out altogether. So the thing is, with fringing, you create these long satin stitches and then you run an anchoring stitch around, a small running stitch, short length running stitch to hold them in place. And because you can't control where these short stitches are on any curve, and it doesn't have to be a circle, but this, say you were doing an O, for instance, you can't control where these stitches are. You can't get even lengths of fringing for the fringe lettering. So instead of doing that to get around curves, I'm going to show you how to make your own pattern stamp of straight stitches that the center of the straight stitches will run along the running line, or the digitizing line, which will then also be the anchoring line through the middle of those satin stitches that are quite long, and they will be able to go around curves a lot better, and you'll get a nice even fringe lettering as a result. So that's what I've come up with as a solution, so hopefully it will help you. Okay, so I'm going to delete that and show you how it's done. Right, so first of all we need to make a pattern stamp, otherwise we'll be there digitizing over and over again. So unfortunately we can't do this in creator level, so it's only for Designer Plus level people, but you could do this in version 7, 8 or 9. Probably even version 6. Although I'm starting to forget what version 6 was all about. It's so long ago since I've looked at it. Alright, so we're going to create the pattern stamp, and to accurately plot a block of long stitches with needle penetration through the centre, we're going to use our grid, and then we can sit the centre line on the digitizing line and we'll be able to make it much more accurate. So we're going to show our grid, and we're going to change the size of the grid so that we can use it for our pattern stamp. So to change the size of the grid, you right click on the grid icon, or you can go to the options hammer and spanner and click on the grid tab, and this dialog will come up. So it has a grid spacing here. So we're going to change the horizontal to 0.4 millimeters, so please work in millimeters. It'll be much more accurate. And vertical 3.5 millimeters. So we're just typing those in. And we're going to turn on snap to grid so that we can get very accurate. And then go OK. Now that looks really weird, but I want you to zoom in so you can see those. We're going to use a single run as we're plotting our stitches manually. So we're not going to draw a rectangle and make a block of stitches of satin stitch. We're going to actually use single run and plot our stitches manually. This is how digitizers used to digitize everything in the past. But because we're doing a pattern stamp, it's going to speed up things once we've created our stamp. So we're going to choose open object and a color of our choice. So I'm going to choose open object and I'm going to choose red. So it shows up for you. And we're going to left click on the intersection of two grid lines. So I don't seem to have snap to grid on. Let me just try again. Snap to grid. Okay. Right, now when you get to the intersection of two grid lines, let's go this one here, they will turn red. Then you can left click and your stitch, first stitch, is going to be right on the intersection of those two grid lines. This will be the horizontal center of our line of stitching, this horizontal line here. Left click at the intersection immediately above where you just clicked. So go straight up that grid line and left click. And now we're going to go across one grid line and down two grid lines. So we'll go across one grid line and down 1, 2. So I actually should have been here so you can see. And so here's our original stitch. We went up 1. Now we're going across 1, down 2 and clicking on that intersection. Now we're going to go up 2 grid lines, so straight up and click. So we've now got 2 clicks right next to each other here. We're going to repeat till we have 6 points at the top and have clicked at the 6th point at the bottom. So we've got 2 points at the top, we come down here, we've got 2 points at the bottom, we've got 3 points at the top, 3 points at the bottom, 4 points at the top, 4 points at the bottom, 5 points, 5 points, 6 points, and we're going to click our 6th point at the bottom. Now we're going to go up 1 grid line and click. So we can hit enter. We've now got, and don't worry that it's got got lots of stitches there. We're going to sort that out in a minute, but we've now got, if I go out of True View, we've now got an object with a start point on the left hand side and on the exact same horizontal line an end point on the right hand side. So these start and ends should be on the same line. But as you saw, there are too many needle penetrations because the stitches are too short. They're the standard 2.5 stitches, and we only want needle penetrations at the extremities, so up here and down here and through the middle. So we need to get rid of these stitches and these stitches, and I don't know if you can see, but I have got my needle points turned on and I can actually see little white dots there and there where the machine has created stitches. So we're going to go select that object and right click on it and go to object properties. So you can do that in the colour film or you can do it on the screen. It's probably easier in the colour film, seeing we're zoomed in so far. And we can see that the single length is the standard 2mm, so we're going to change that to 3.5. And we'll turn off the variable run length. Variable run length, it probably wouldn't have any effect in this case, but variable run length actually shortens stitches to get around curves, and so we don't want any accidental shortening of stitches if the software decides it needs to, because it does make nicer curves, but in this case we don't need it. So this way all our stitches will be at least 3.5 long, and we're going to go OK. And now you can see that we have needle points up the top, and we have needle points through the middle, and we have needle points down the bottom, but there are none in between. There are a couple here because that's the tie-in or tie-off. Don't worry about that at this stage because once you start using it as a pattern, they'll disappear. Go to your reshape while you're here to make sure that your start is still on the left and your end is still on the right. Okay, now if I go back to True View, you can see that we have got needle penetrations through here. Sorry, I've turned off my grid. There we go. The problem is that if we cut the bobbin thread now on this, these would unravel because we've just got needle penetrations through here. There's nothing anchoring this down. So what we need to do is now create an anchoring stitch. So I'll go back out of True View and go to the open object, and we're finishing up here with the satin stitch, so I just want a running stitch now. Sorry, we were running stitch, but we turned it into satin by changing the stitch length. So it's still running stitch, still the same colour, and I'm going to make sure my snap to grid's still on. I've been fiddling around. I paused the video, so I'll just double check that. No, it's gone off. So we'll go OK. Alright, so now I can see that I can left click here where we ended to start my running anchoring stitch, then come over and left click right at the beginning on this side, and then come back again so that we end up on the right hand side again. So there's a left click here, a left click there, and a left click back again, and enter. Now, of course, that is the standard 2mm stitch length, which probably is a little bit long for holding all the stitches in place. So we'll select that object and right click on it to get the object properties, and let's change that to 1mm and go OK. So now we've got a very short stitch. If I go out of True View, you can see there's tiny little stitches here. If I go back to 1%, 100% I should say, which is right out there, you can see this is a tiny little stitch with tiny little stitches. Even the whole satin part of it is tiny. It's still more than 100%, so those stitches are going to be very, very small. Okay, we've now created all the objects for our pattern stamp, so we're going to select them both and right click and group them. because we want this to work as one object. And we're going to make sure it's still selected. I'll just go out of True View. It should be pink. It should have the selection handles around, and we're going to create our pattern stamp. So we come up to the word Settings in the top menu, and we come down here to Create Pattern. Now, if you haven't got anything here, you need to create a pattern set to put them in. The software won't allow you to put them in any of the existing pattern sets that came with the software. You have to create your own new one. I've got several created for different things, but I've got one just called Carol, which I'll put it in. But if you haven't got anything here, or you want to create a new one because your other ones have things in them that aren't related to this type of work, you want to have its own section, then all you do is click on the word Create and create a new pattern set name and go OK. I'm going to cancel because I don't need to, and then that name will appear here, and if it's not the first one, it'll appear in your drop down menu of all the ones you've created. Okay, now we're going to give it a pattern name. I'm going to call this a Fringed Lettering Fringe, and I've already done it, so it's going to come up with do I want to overwrite? And so anyway, give it a name. Just leave these both checked down here and go OK. And as you can see, you won't get this, but it wants to know if I want to overwrite. I'll just say yes for now. Okay, so that we can go ahead, but you won't get that message if you haven't already created something you want to overwrite. So if you use the name twice, it will ask you that. So it is not created yet. There's still one more step, and if you look down the bottom left of your software screen, you'll see it asks you to enter the start point of the reference line. It's in the very bottom left of your screen. I can't take my cursor down there because it will move the whole screen, but I'm going to start my reference line here on the left, and I've still got Snap to Grid on, so I can use that to make sure I'm right on that grid intersection. And the end of my reference line is going to be right on the grid intersection on the right hand side in the center. And then you will get a dialog saying that it has been created, so you can go OK. You then have a pattern stamp. This object is no longer required because you have already created your pattern stamp. So we can actually delete that, or I'm actually, because I don't want this horrible grid anymore, I'm going to just close the whole design down, and I'm not going to save changes because I've made my pattern stamp, so I don't need it. So I'll go no and get myself a new design. Now I'll just take that. Oh, no, I'll leave the grid on. No, I'll take it off. You can now use that pattern stamp to create your letters. Now you can do them freehand straight here on the embroidery canvas. If you have a pen tablet and a pen, you can actually just draw with your open freehand tool. You can use the open object and use your left and right clicks with your mouse, or you can actually open freehand with your mouse as well if you feel confident. So let's try that first. An open freehand, and I'm going to go to the pattern run outline, and I'm going to right click on that so that I can choose my pattern. So I need to hit the select on the patterns, and in the drop down menu look for my set, which is called Carol, and there's my lettering fringe. This was a couple of other experiments I did, but this is the one I just created now, so I'm going to select that and go OK and go OK. So I can now draw with that fringe lettering. That was absolutely huge. Perhaps I will put the grid back on so I've got some sort of idea of how big I'm doing something. So I'll just undo that one and do it a little bit smaller. So there's my C for Carol. Now again, I could use the open object, and I could left click and then right click for my curves. and you've got a little bit more control if you haven't got a pen. On a pen tablet, drawing with a mouse is a little bit more difficult. And enter that. Oh, I forgot to select my pattern, didn't I? So I'll select that now and change the object properties into pattern run. And of course I've got to, that lettering fringe is still there, so I can just go OK. Alright, now let's zoom in and go to True View first. You'll see that the stitches are very close together on this side, and they may even, depending on how tight the curve is, be overlapping. Do not worry about that. And you can see they're spread apart on this side. Do not worry about that either. Once you cut the bobbin thread, these fringes will all come out, you know, they'll splay out a little bit, and they will be evenly fluffy around the anchoring stitch through the middle. That's why we've anchored in the middle and not on one side, so that we get a nice reasonably dense fringe along that anchoring line. So that anchoring line is the digitizing line as well, so that's the shape you need to use. Now you can use a font as a guide. Oh, before I go on to that, you need to make fairly large lettering. You can't use this for small lettering. If you get too tight in your curves, these might actually overlap the anchoring line, or the anchoring line might overlap some of your fringes in a very tight curve. Let me do a small O. I'll just do a open freehand and do a small O. Well, I'll just, yeah, do that. Okay. Now, if your anchoring line, let's go out of True View. If your anchoring line, oh, undo, I just accidentally clicked, sorry. If your anchoring line from one part of the letter goes over your fringe from another part of the letter, you're not going to be able to get a fringe there, because it'll all be anchored with the anchoring line. So you need to be careful when you're forming your letters that this doesn't happen. So you need a fairly clean style of lettering, or some sort of font that's quite clean, and you may need to reshape even if you know, following a font, loosely following a font, so that you don't get this happening. So I'll select those and delete them. Delete, delete, delete on the keyboard. And, oh, why didn't they delete? Start to select them and delete. That's better. Another thing you have to keep in mind is you cannot resize after the fact. So because we used a running stitch to create those stitches and we had a specific stitch length, if we increase the size of our design, the width of those objects will increase and it will insert extra needle points in, so you won't get a fringe anymore. Let me just demonstrate. So I'll get my open object, my pattern run, and I'll select my pattern and go OK and OK. And I will, I've got snap to grid on, I'll just turn that off. Okay, and I will digitize my letter C again and enter, and I'll zoom in and I'll go to True View because it'll become obvious then. Now if I select that letter and I increase its size dramatically, you can see here now that I have got extra needle points on either side of that center because these stitches have a specific length. So make sure you create your lettering at the size you want to finish it with before you move on, before you actually digitize. So if you're using a font, size your font first. If you're using freehand, draw yourself some guidelines so you keep the size very close to what you want to end up with. A similar issue will happen if you try and reduce the size. So once you've created your letters, that's the size they're going to be. Okay, I'll delete that. Okay, and I'll go through to Art Canvas just to show you how you can use a font. So if I go to Art Canvas, you don't want to use the lettering fonts because they will be stitches. We just want an image of a font. So I'm going to just come into Art Canvas, choose my vector lettering, and left click on the screen, and you could type a whole name if you want. And enter. Oh, no, backspace. You don't need to enter because that will create a return because we're typing. Okay, I'm still in lettering mode. I need to go to the select mode and I need to choose my font then. And I actually chose a font called Freehand BJ. When I was doing this, you want a fairly a scripty type of font because you don't want too many starts and stops, or you could do block fonts as well. It's entirely up to you, but anyway, freehand should have come up, but it hasn't, so I'll just go down to the F's, E, F, G, there it is, freehand BJ. That gave me a scripty looking font, and I'm going to increase the size of it because it's very small, and as you saw, small letters are going to be hard to control so that you don't, anchor down the wrong bits. So I'm going to select that lettering with the select tool, and I'm going to resize it to a height of 50 millimeters. So I need to unlock I need to keep it proportionally scaled, so have the lock locked and change your height to 50 millimeters. You might get away with slightly smaller, but it depends if you've got upper and lower case. Enter. There we go. That's a decent size. And we can go straight through to embroidery canvas again because, as I said, we only want the image. Now, if your image of your vector lettering doesn't show up, make sure you've got this icon highlighted. That's the little triangle, circle and square. That will make any vector graphics show on screen. Okay, I can get rid of that grid now because I've got this as a size and also a shape of the lettering. So here you can see I've got the letter C. I'm just going to digitize through the middle of that letter because, as we saw, the middle line is the digitizing line and you will get a little bit of width from the fringe. It'll be less than the width of the digitizing because once you cut the bobbin thread it'll relax, and it'll be a constant width too around. So it doesn't matter if you choose a font that's thick and thin, just so long as you go through the middle of it. Alright, so we get our open object, and in this case I am going to use my left and right clicks, and let's use orange this time. And I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to left click here is where I want to start. You want to get a fairly smooth line, so just work your way through and enter. And I forgot to choose the pattern again, didn't I? So select, right click, object properties, pattern run, and there it is. Okay. So I need to set that up to start so that all my objects will be that. So I will click off so nothing's selected, right click on my pattern run and go OK, and because I had it already selected, chosen, it's come up at the right one. So now that I've got pattern run chosen, everything I digitize will be that pattern. Now I'm not going to worry about this little tail here because that's just going to complicate issues. So I'm going to start the A. Now the A, you need to think about this, as I said, so that you don't cross things over. So the A, you want this part to stitch first before this part, so that your anchoring stitches from this curve of the A don't run into the fringes of this part of the A. So that's the other way of thinking of it too. You can have things on top of each other so long as the anchoring stitches aren't on top of another object's fringe, if that makes sense. So open object, I'm going to start with my A here, through the middle, and I'll stop about here. I need to be roughly in the middle of that part. So even though I haven't gone through the middle right here, I'm roughly in the middle of the A, just shy of it, and enter. For some reason it's not doing the pattern fill. I'll just change it to pattern fill, and there we go. Now I'm going to do another open object. I'll make sure I've got the pattern fill this time, and I'm going to start here. Enter. Okay, now you can see that my anchoring stitch has run through, for this one, has run over the top of those fringes of the part underneath. So we need to do a little bit of reshaping. So you've got to be a little bit thoughtful. Here it won't matter because the anchoring stitches for this curve here are underneath these fringes here. So these fringes will not be anchored down by that anchoring stitch. But down here, this anchoring stitch is going to come after these fringes are stitched, and it's going to cross over them. So we need to rethink about how this A is going to come into here. So I'm going to select that part of the A and go to the reshape tool, and I'm going to bring that length back and across till I can get it clear of this anchoring. So I've got that there. I might select all of these nodes here. I've got that one selected. If I hold my shift key down, I can select around to there and just swing all of these nodes over a bit and a bit more. Okay, now the anchoring stitch for this is coming down here, but when we cut the thread, the fringe will come to about here. This fringe here will go back a bit too. There may be a gap sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is put another node in here and then just bend this around a bit. And I might make that a curved node. Oh, let's see. Want to keep these fringes clear of this anchoring line, so move it over a little, up a little bit, and over a little bit. Oh, it's gone a bit weird now. I'll just go, looks like I might have doubled everything. I'll turn off the show the outlines, that's better. It's not so confusing then. The show outlines was on and, oh, now it's on. Now it's off. Something went a bit weird then, but you can see now that I have cleared that. I'm just trying to get this fringe here a little bit more. I'll go back to the reshape tool of that one. A little bit clearer of the anchoring stitches going through here, but still leave enough fringe so it looks like it's connected. So you really need to test sew these letters to make sure they work, because you know, if you get gaps where you don't want them, you'll have to go back in and tweak so that your anchoring stitches don't run into the fringe of the previous object. Hope that makes sense. Now, of course, once you've created your letters, if you're going to do a lot of different people's names, you might want to select the whole letter, in this case 2 objects, and add it to your keyboard mapping if you've got version 9. So you can do that. I've got a video on mapping, keyboard mapping from your screen. So you might do one whole name and map it map the letters from that name directly from here. It would be quicker than creating the whole alphabet, because you might not ever use some of the letters of the alphabet. But then the next person's name, you can use the letters you've already got from your keyboard mapping, but then you might want to add new letters as well to finish off the name. I hope that makes sense. For the O here, I would just create a circle. So I would still do it as an open object, because you don't want to have the software trying to put the right number of repeats around. So open object, pattern run, and we've got the orange color still. So I'm just making an O, and I'll stop very close to the first one, but I can adjust that if I need to. So it's not too bad actually. I would actually go to the reshape tool, select that, go to the reshape tool and move that node even closer, because it's not causing any problems going that close. Even overlap it on top of the previous one. The other thing you need to worry about is making sure you have enough space in the holes. So even though this looks like, well, this one's got plenty of space, but over here the space starts to get a bit small, but it will actually be a slightly larger, because when you cut your thread, these fringes won't be quite this wide, and I am zoomed in. Let me go to 1:1. Okay, so the fringes won't be quite that wide, so you will gain a little bit extra space, but just be careful you don't have tiny little holes that are not going to really show up because the fringe is a problem. Let's do the R just now. R's are funny. Let's just try. I'm going to get a good look. It should be okay if you like this sort of R in a script. Open object, pattern stamp, orange color. Now I can start here where I finished the A in this instance. And what I'll do is I'll finish up there the first part, enter, and then I'll start one here very close to that anchoring line, but not, oh no, because my anchoring line is going to be a problem, isn't it? I might need to start here. I might need to do this part of the R first. Enter. Okay, so I've got anchoring stitches on top of the stitches that are going to be loose, which is not ideal. So in this case, I'm going to select this part of the R and move it up one object so that it stitches before this part, and that way these anchoring stitches don't cover any of the long satin parts. So that will work. And then you could group those two together and create them into one letter if you wanted to save it, or add it to your keyboard mapping. And of course the L is going to be very easy. Okay, so as I said, don't worry about how weird it looks even in true view on the screen, because when you have stitched it out and cut your bobbin thread, these fluffy things will sort themselves out, these fringes. Okay, I hope that's given you a good starting place to experiment, and as I said, even if you just test sew one letter, use your tiny little hoop, or hoop up a piece of fabric and test out one letter at a time, and you can keep using that same hoop till you've filled it up with each practice. Once you've got an alphabet of fringed lettering, you'll be able to use it over and over again. So those of you who haven't got version 9 and you want to save these letters because you put so much work into them, just save your designs as you create each name, or save each letter as a design. It's up to you, and you'll have to open them and line them up yourself. Okay, so I'll put the links below to my other Fringe course and the keyboard mapping YouTube video, and hopefully you will enjoy those, and happy digitizing.